Good evening, everyone. I'm glad you are all here for the Genre Committee event, which will be a conversation with John Lee Hancock. We are so happy he was able to do this. We've been trying this for a little while, and we finally have it together. And it's going to be a really great conversation. First, before we start, we like to talk about the Genre Committee upcoming events or projects that we are proposing to do next. We are trying to do a Western event where will be a panel discussion about Westerns. We have a YA genre event coming up soon. And of course, we are trying to do our annual Futurism panel, which will be very, very interesting. So please stay in touch by looking at the calendar, the WGA calendar for the WGA events that are coming up. My name is Dwayne Johnson Cochran. I am the chairman of the Genre Committee of the Writers Guild of America, and I'd like to turn it over to John Lee Hancock, but first to our moderator, to John Allen Simon, who will be taking the reins on the interview today. And thank you very much. And here he is, John Allen Simon and John Lee Hancock.
Thank you, Dwayne. It's just such a pleasure to be doing this panel, the Salon with John Lee Hancock, whose work I've admired since his very first script, A Perfect World, that Clint Eastwood directed. Just really a model of great screenwriting. And we're going to be talking primarily about biopics, biopics, as some people pronounce them. It just happens, I think, that John Lee Hancock has had more than his share of those in his filmography, but we'll get to that. And we'll talk about his career and working as a writer and working with writers and working as a director. So without going too much into his background to start, since we're going to get into that, John Lee, tell us a little bit about growing up in Texas, becoming a lawyer, and then discarding the easy life of the legal profession for the vicissitudes of the film business.
I grew up on the Gulf Coast of Texas, and I'd always enjoyed writing. You know, from the time I was in elementary school, I would write little short stories all the time. And I just knew I liked it because I loved books, and my mother was a big inspiration when I was growing up as a young child, reading to us, and just, you know, the imaginative process of having your mother read to you or you reading for yourself and understanding that someone actually writes those words was pretty great when it hit me. And I thought, well, I can write maybe those words too, maybe not as well, but I can try. And so I wrote a lot in elementary school and kept writing. You know, I knew somebody in a neighboring town whose father had gone to the moon, was an astronaut. I didn't know anybody whose father or mother was a writer. So it was far more viable, a career alternative to, you know, to go to the moon than it was to become a writer. I went to college, got an English degree, didn't know quite what to do with it. It was writing short fiction mostly. Was accepted to law school, so I went to law school. Kept writing some in law school, but it's pretty onerous in terms of what you have to do. And then started practicing law in Houston, practiced law for about 3 years. And during that time, I started writing screenplays, kind of self-taught, because unlike today, there weren't a lot of screenplays out that you could read. You couldn't go to the bookstore and see a whole bunch of bound, you know, you couldn't get the screenplays of Woody Allen or this or whatever, you just couldn't get it. So you had to find, hunt and peck a bit, and there was no internet at that time. So you had to hunt and peck a bit to try to find and make lots of calls to try to find scripts to read, to learn format so that you could, you know, if you had a computer, set tabs to accomplish format. But I wrote my first script in Houston, and it's awful. But I did get accepted to Sundance Institute was trying to set up satellite programs at the time in different cities. And now they've obviously accomplished that, and it's an international program now. At the time, one of the early ones was in Austin, Texas, which was kind of a hotbed for independent films at the time. There were a lot of—
Had Richard Linklater already made
No,
it?
no, this was more, this was before, this was more like Eagle Pennell, you know, just, there were writers there, there were funky directors there. It was an indie scene before Linklater, before any of those types had come along. So they had a thing there, and they had a separate program. They had a big symposium they were doing, and John Sayles was coming. Bill Whitliff was there. He lived in Austin. Broyles was there. William Broyles was there. Lots of these types. Anyway, but they had a separate thing that was going on during the symposium, which was a 4-day weekend, I believe, a long weekend, which was they were accepting 8 different people to work with Frank Danielle, who had been the head of the film school at Columbia and then at USC. And he was going to work with 8 specific candidates, spending time working on their scripts for these 4 days, which meant you'd have a half day on each script. But you know, long story short, my script, though not very good, I guess showed some kind of promise, or the competition wasn't very strong. And I was accepted into this group of 8, and then Frank just ripped us all to shreds. You know, in the best way possible. I needed it. So anyway, you know, I came away from that experience thinking that perhaps I'm not without talent, but I have a long way to go. And eventually I kept writing, and then I decided I was going to move to Los Angeles.
And when you decided to move, had you already been involved with some theater back in Texas, or was that when you came out to Los Angeles that you got involved with the Hudson Theater and some avant-garde productions?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, I took an acting class in Houston, less because I wanted to be an actor and more because I wanted to understand what actors did. And it was actually a really good thing to do because I got in this acting class. It was a scene study class. And pretty quickly, I started writing scenes and monologues for different actors. And they would do them, and the teacher would say, "Where's that from?" And they would go, "It's from him." And so, you know, the teacher might like it. And then somebody else would say, "Hey, can you write something for me?" So I would write, and it would go up immediately, almost within the week. And then I would write something else, and it would go up. So I enjoyed that process. And so when I moved to Los Angeles, I did get involved in one acting class, kind of doing the same thing, and then got involved in really, really funky small-time theater, you know, in Los Angeles on Santa Monica Boulevard. Now the Hudson Complex is really nice. At the time, it was the Fig Tree Theater, which sounds like it was a porn theater, and it wasn't far off, by the way. But you put up productions there with friends.
And you went on to one of your first things that I guess almost no one has seen is a small straight to video indie you did called Hard Time Romance that you were telling me about. And it sounds like the kind of experience that might have sent you back to the legal profession. But how did that come into play? Was it through your theater work?
It was. Brandon Lee, who, you know, tragically died on a set in North Carolina many years ago, doing the movie The Crow, was one of my best friends. And we were in this theater company together. And Brandon was dating a girl at the time who worked for a mom and pop operation in the Valley. And this is 90% of the people looking at this aren't going to understand that this is the way of the world back then. But this is kind of late 80s, mid to late 80s. And there was no Blockbuster yet. There were video stores that had just popped up, and they had lots of empty shelves. So people were actually creating content that was straight to video, not because it didn't make it in the theaters, but because it was designated for straight to video because they had empty shelves. And this mom and pop company in the Valley read a script of mine through Brandon passing it along, and they paid me a tiny amount of money. I wasn't in the guild yet or anything, and for it. And then I said, you know, they were looking for a director. And I said, well, I would love to direct it. I'm directing theater. And they said, okay, you can direct it, but we're not going to pay you. And I went, okay, that's fine. So my title was Vaya con Dios. They changed it later to Hard Time Romance, against my wishes. But anyway, so it was a little tiny movie that we probably made for $150,000, shooting short ends in Las Cruces, New Mexico. I can't remember the number of days, but it wasn't many days. Every day was just a fight, you know. And I got locked out of the editing room, and then they brought me back in when the movie didn't make any sense. And it's a crazy story, but I survived it. And the movie's not good, but given what I was up against, it's not horrible either. So,
well, your big break kind of came when you were working as a reader at the Triad Agency, right?
Right.
Another kind of accidental, serendipitous encounter, which is pretty funny if you want to share that.
Sure. I mean, like a lot of people trying to make it in Los Angeles, I had myriad odd jobs. I worked for a fashion photographer, doing his painting his cove and doing casting for him. I would do PA work. And also because I wanted to see what was out in the marketplace, started doing reading scripts for Triad Agency, which a lot of people aren't going to know what that is, but it was one of the big four agencies back then, and they merged with William Morris not long after I worked for them. But they had Sly Stallone and different, you know, Schwarzenegger and different big clients and things like that. So I was reading for them because I could read scripts and see what was being sold and glean kind of what the marketplace was like, and books as well. And the books paid you more because you got paid by the page, like Dickens wrote by the word. I was reading by the page, and so they let me pick when I would go, and you'd have to drive. They couldn't email it to you. You had to drive to Century City, get your work for the week, bring it home, read it, do the coverage, type it out, print it, drive it back. So when I would go over there, they would say, what do you want? Because I'd been there a little bit, and I'd pick the thickest book possible because I know I was going to make more money. And I'm a fairly fast reader. So I would do that. But one of the books one time I got, and I enjoyed the book a great deal. I wish I could remember what the book was called, but I liked it a great deal. I just didn't think it was a movie at all. I didn't think it would translate. And so I wrote my coverage thusly, saying, what a great book, great characters. I don't know that this is a movie. I think it's best. It's already in its best form, which is a wonderful book that people should read. And then, so I turned it in, fine, whatever. A few days later, I get a call from my boss, and we were down in the basement in a building in Century City. And my boss called and said, kind of, what have you done? I said, what do you mean? And she said, Lee Rosenberg, who is one of the senior partners at Triad, is asking to meet with you. And I said, I don't even know who Lee Rosenberg is. And she told me, and she said, you passed on his favorite book. He sent it down to be covered, and you passed on it. And I said, why didn't someone tell me? I can be bought. You know, just tell me that. I mean, this is the best movie that's ever been made, and I will write it for you. I promise. Nobody ever told me. So anyway, long story short, I go up and meet with Lee, and he said, reading your coverage, I can tell that you're a very good writer. Do you write? And I said, yes, I do. And he said, do you have something perchance I might read? And I said, yes, I do. And it just so happened that I had a script that I'd finished and done rewrites on and was ready to send out again. And he said, I'm leaving tomorrow afternoon. At the end of the day tomorrow, I'm leaving to fly to Europe, and I will take your script with me and read it on the plane if you'll get it here tomorrow. Now, and so the next day I brought it over and he took it away. He came back 2 weeks later and he called me and he said, I think we have an agent here who shares your taste, which probably meant that he didn't care for it, but it wasn't horribly written. And so he sent me to Rhonda Gomez, who was an amazing literary agent and just had great taste and really kick-started my career. But I know for a fact that if I had been in the middle of writing something and I had said, Mr. Rosenberg, I don't have anything now, but I'll have it in a month, that it would have never happened. I just know it. I know the fact that, the circumstances led to, me having the script at that precise moment was nothing but sheer luck. I mean, I'd worked hard to get the script finished, but the timing was sheer luck.
And that script was not a perfect world, though.
No. It was a different script. It actually was via con Dios.
Ah.
And Rhonda read it and liked it. And she said, I'm not sure. I think it's a tough one to get made. And she said, I can't take you on as a client. Even though she liked my writing, she goes, here's the thing. Everybody in the agency in the literary division has to raise their hand and say, yes, we want this person to be a contracted, be represented by the agency. If one person said no, you were blackballed. So anyway, I was there were 3 different writers during that time that all we were pocket clients of Rhonda Gomez. And she was great to us all. And once a month, she would have us over for dinner and we would talk about what we were working on. And it made me feel very important and like I belonged in Hollywood because I had this kind of important agent who thought I was a good writer. And it was me, Nicole Holofcener, and Vince Gilligan.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't sign any of us. So, we were pocket clients. And we had many, many, many good memories from that time. But anyway, so eventually, then I went off, did via con Dios. And then I wrote A Perfect World and she read it and she took it and ran with it.
And Spielberg was originally going to direct it. Maybe we can tell that story, a short version of it, entertaining though it is, so we can get to our main topic of biopictures.
Sure. Mark Johnson was with Barry Levinson, his partner, and had Baltimore Pictures, and they optioned A Perfect World. And Mark and Steven Spielberg were good friends, and everybody had kind of heard about this script because for some reason it just kind of caught fire and everybody was reading it. And I was getting calls from people I didn't know saying that they loved it, et cetera. And Steven told Mark one day at Brentwood Country Mart or whatever, I hear you have a great script. How come you haven't sent it to me? And Mark said, it has a little bit of Sugarland Express in it. So I didn't know that you'd be interested. And Steven said, let me be the judge of that. And so Steven read it. And the next thing you know, I get a call from Mark saying, what are you doing Saturday? And I was still doing PA work. I was waiting for the check to clear on the option, which I believe was $25,000 for a year, I was psyched. It was so great. But it takes a little while. Sometimes it takes like a month, for you go, yes, we're going to option it. And we have to go through the lawyers and all that stuff. So I hadn't gotten the check yet. So I was still doing PA work. And so Mark called me and he said, what are you doing Saturday? You want to go to lunch? And I said, sure. That sounds like a free lunch. That's good. I need one. And we went to Spielberg's house. So that was a left turn. And we get there and Steven's not there. He has taken one of their kids and gone to Jack in the Box, which is just blew my mind thinking about Steven Spielberg driving through at Jack in the Box. But I'm there and I'm talking to Kate Capshaw, his wife, who's from Fort Worth, Texas, I believe. So I'm kind of at home because it's really friendly and there are dogs and Kate and we're talking Texas. And at some point I leaned back. I was laughing at something she said. And I leaned back and I felt a framed painting or something starting to collapse on my head. And I reached back with both hands thinking that a Matisse was going to crash over me and my head was going to go through some, famous painting. And at that precise moment, Steven comes in the door and I looked around behind me and it was a sled encased in lucite and it was Rosebud.
Right. You're from season 10.
Yeah. And so I looked at Steven and he goes, pretty cool, huh? And I said, I almost destroyed the single most important of Hollywood memorabilia. And Mark Johnson said, no, they burned the best one. Don't worry about it. And so we hung it back up and it was all good.
And then he wanted to direct it, but he was waiting for special effects that he
Yes.
didn't think were going to be finished in time.
Yes. He said, I want to do this. He goes, I'm supposed to do this dinosaur movie. But I know that ILM's not going to be ready. It's a big task. It's not their fault. They're not going to be ready. And of course, it was Jurassic Park, the first one. And he said, so I want to do this while I'm waiting on them, and then I'll do that one after. And he said, but I can't. He said, and I really love the script because we can work a week on it, and I'll be good to go. I said, okay, great. And he said, but let's wait a week because I'm going to hear from ILM how they're going along with the schedule. So a week later, I got a call saying, Steven can't do it. ILM said, don't wait on us. We're going to be ready. And he couldn't do it. He said, there's so much money obligated to this by Universal that I can't just say, oh, we're going to push it. And Steven did me a solid because it could have easily become something where everybody said, Steven thought better of directing this little movie. But instead it became, Steven really wanted to direct this movie and couldn't because of schedule, which is, very, very different. And so then I everybody had read A Perfect World at that time. So I was getting lots of different work and offers and things like that. And Warner Brothers sent me a book that they had purchased for Clint Eastwood. And, they sent Clint A Perfect World as a writing sample to see, can we send this guy the book? Because he might be good to write it and he's really cheap. And
was that Midnight in the...
No. I don't even remember the name of the book. This is long before Perfect World got made, or a couple of years before anyway. And Clint read the script and he goes, forget about the book. What's going on with this script? And they go, well, Steven's attached right now. And Clint said, let me know if something changes. And so as soon as Steven dropped out, Clint stepped in, and this is before Unforgiven. So this isn't the Clint Eastwood of Unforgiven and things. He had, had some good movies in the last 5 years, but he'd also had some
Every Which Way But Loose Clint Eastwood
kind of stuff, and Heat with Burt Reynolds or whatever it was called, something Heat, Midnight, I don't know. Anyway, he had some stuff, but but we walked out. I went in and had the meeting with Clint, and I loved him, and he said, This script reminds me of Lonely Are the Brave, which is a favorite movie of mine. And we walked out of there, and I told Mark, I go, he gets this movie, I think. And Mark said, I think he does too. And by the way, he has this Western that I think might be good, and sure enough, it was. So, we were off to the races after that.
Well, let's skip ahead because time is marching on, and I want to get to the 4 movies that I really would like to go into a little bit in depth with you on. The first one being The Rookie, which I guess was your studio directorial debut, if not your actual directorial debut. We're going to play a kind of longish clip from this. So, and I am doing it. So please bear with me, fellow writers, as I attempt to share the screen and play the clip. Hopefully that played okay. Did it play okay for you, John Lee?
It did.
Oh, good. All right. Well, you didn't know what scene I was going to show, but this film was based on a true story about Jim Morris, who had given up his dreams of becoming a major league pitcher in order to become a high school teacher and high school coach, and improbably at the age of 36 reignited his pitching career, first in the would you say a farm league, and then in the major leagues. What attracted you to the story? It seems a little bit like there's a big element of could be a big element of your own story in it, in terms of your giving up a safe profession for an insecure one.
It was a circuitous route that it took. Mark Johnson, remember Mark from, A Perfect World, was attached as a producer on this. And he said, would you do me a favor and read a script? It's set in West Texas. and it's written by a guy who lives in Portland, Oregon. So, and Mark, who grew up in Spain and Virginia and Los Angeles, you know, said, I don't know if this is legit or not, but you can read it and tell me if it feels like West Texas. And I said, sure, I'll read it. I read the script and really enjoyed it. And I said, whoever this Mike Rich guy is in Portland, he did his research. So, you know, I talked to Mark about it, and Mark said, you know what, you should direct this. Because he knew that I was looking to direct something, and I had a contract with Warner Brothers to write and direct something. I can't remember what it was at the time. But those are always like, if you write it and if it's good, you know, if we don't want you to direct it, we can always maybe pay you off or whatever. It was one of those deals. And so he said, you're not going to get the job because it was coming up on what was supposed to be a strike that wasn't. He said, you're not going to get the job as a director, but you've proven that you can go into a room and get a job as a writer. You haven't proven that as a director, and I think it would be good experience for you. And that made sense to me. And I said, no, that's kind of a fun exercise. I'll do that. So I didn't even tell my wife about it. I just, you know, spent a day and a half rereading it and thinking about it and making some notes, and went into Disney, and Nina Jacobson was the head of production there. And there were a bunch of suits around, and they started asking me questions about it, and they'd interviewed a whole bunch of different people. And I wasn't going to get the job. I could just be honest. So I told them exactly what I thought. And I said, the last thing you need to do is have somebody come in and rewrite this, you know, who thinks they know Texas because they had a layover at DFW one time. You know, this is the middle part of the United States. I said, this Mike Rich guy from Portland, he got it right. This is how West Texas people talk. So don't muck with it too much. And, you know, and I told him I had different ideas about things, and we said goodbye. And I got in my truck and was driving home. And Mark Johnson called me and said, I hope you were serious about this because you just got the job. Said Nina, to her credit, said, you know, everybody else has directed movies and he hasn't, but it's obvious who we should choose for this. And I'm willing to take the chance. So all of a sudden I was directing a studio movie.
Now, you had already gotten quite a bit of acclaim as a writer at this point, and now you were working with another writer, presumably, with Mike Rich.
Yeah.
What was that experience like? How did you work with him on The Rookie, and what did you glean from that for going forward on other projects?
It was fabulous. It was fabulous by the end. At the start, it was a little rocky because Mike got the call that no writer wants to get, which is good news, they're making your movie, which he already kind of knew. They were meeting with directors. Bad news, they're hiring a writer who really hasn't directed to direct your movie. So the first thing Mike is thinking is he's going to throw out the script and start over. And Mike's agent at the time, who now I think sells real estate, but he made a demand that I had to meet with him and sell him on the fact that I was going to be the director of this movie and what my ideas were. And everybody goes, well, that's a load of horse, Pucky, you know, don't do it. And I go, no, I want to get off on the right foot with this Mike Rich guy. So I'll meet with his agent. So I had lunch with his agent. I told him what I was thinking. And I said, do I have ideas for things that I want to do? Yes, I do. Do I think that Mike can do them? I know he can. So, you know, I met Mike and we got along well. And then when I moved down to Austin to do prep, I set a desk up in my office. I had a big, nice office, my director's office. And I set another desk in there. And when he showed up, he said, where do you put me? Just stick me in a corner somewhere. And I go, no, you're with me. So I brought him up to the office and he was there with me, and he would work there and I would work there, and we could throw stuff back and forth nonstop. And we could look at the wall and all the different, you know, kind of our mood boards and what was not working and do it together. And it was really, really helpful. And so we became very good friends through that process.
Now, part of the core of the story is Jim Morris's relationship with his father, as very ably played by Brian Cox, terrific British actor.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if that was inherent in the story itself, or in Jim Morris's real story, or was that something that you felt you needed to emphasize in order that there be some dramatic tension?
It was certainly there, but it was something I wanted to lean into. And I think that's your job as a director when you've got a great script like this one, is to really embrace the things that you want to rise to the top. And it was certainly all there. And Mike and I talked about it a lot, but it's kind of, it's like Jim Morris he likes being a chemistry teacher. He likes being a teacher. He's got a fantastic wife and 2 great kids. He gets to coach baseball, a sport he loves. Life's pretty good, but still there's something nagging at him. And I think that comes from, in some ways, his lack of resolution of a relationship with his father, and you know, like you said, Brian Cox is just the best. But there was something about the hard ass of Brian Cox that, even though Dennis loves his son, who's a little boy and all that, there's still some residue of fathers and son that passes down. So for instance, I remember there was one scene where they're at night together, they've gone to eat together, and they're coming back to the truck, and Dennis comes out, and we're kind of rehearsing it, and Dennis has his arm around Angus T. Jones, who, you know, was before 8.5 Men and everything. You know, this is kind of his first movie, I think. And I said, Dennis, do me a favor and don't touch him. And Dennis had a son, Jack, at that time, who was close to the same age. And he goes, that just feels so weird to me that I wouldn't touch my son or put my arm around him or slap him on the back of the head or something like that. And I said, just don't. I want there to be some kind of residual effect of this, that you love him, you love spending time with him, but you're not comfortable being demonstrative because your father wasn't that way with you. And I said, there'll come a time when you can be demonstrative. I just want to save that for then. And we also talked a lot about him not smiling too much, because Dennis has a smile that will light up a room. And I said, you know, we're going to go to that, but let's save it. Can you save it for me? And he goes, none of this makes really any sense to me, but I'll do it. So, and he did. And, you know, and so then we came to the day where I said, today's the day you get to hug and smile.
Well, it's one of his best performances, and I think he's on record as having set up to that point, at least. It was his favorite of all of his performances in The Rookie. Very, very nuanced and filled with the kind of frustrations of that unresolved father-son relationship. Did you encourage Dennis to meet with Jim Morris, or how did you feel about people meeting their real life counterparts? Rachel Griffiths meeting his wife, and any of that? Or
I honestly talk to the actors about it and leave it to them. And actors are very different. Dennis really wanted to meet Jimmy, so he could ask him tons of questions and things. Rachel didn't necessarily want to meet Laurie because she said, I feel like from this script, I'm kind of locked into something, and we had already been kind of rehearsing and things, and I loved what she was doing. And she goes, I'm afraid that it's going to throw water on the fire I'm building. And I said, fine, don't meet her. So I think I leave it up to the actor, honestly. I mean, I want to meet with them, you know, behind the scenes as a director. I want to meet with them and spend time with them, but I'm not going to necessarily make the actors meet with them. But yeah, Dennis and Jimmy spend a lot of time together.
And I think in terms of what you allow yourself to have invented for the film and not invent, how do you, it's a very interesting question, isn't it, always, with something that's based on fact. I saw some critique of your drama we're not going to talk about, the Alamo, in which somebody was very picky about the size of the cathedral, the chapel in the Alamo itself being not quite to the actual scale of the chapel. People go crazy over that stuff. I know some people were upset at the end of the film, towards the end of the film, when Jim Morris gives the ball that he struck out his first major league hitter with to his father rather than his son. But that really happened, and it feels resonant with what the themes of the movie are. Was there anything that you changed that gave you qualms, or that you really spent some back and forth or sleepless moments over?
Not really, because Mike and I talked through everything that was true and everything that wasn't. And sometimes when you're doing this, you'll have 3 different things that happened, and they happened over the course of a year. And I completely understand from a writer's standpoint how to make a screenplay work. You might have to combine all 3 of those things and make them kind of congeal in a day or a week. And I kind of have no problem with that if there's truth in that. I mean, there are other things I do have problems with, but that's not one of them. There's certainly something that's complete imagination from Mike Rich, which is when Jimmy Morris stops his truck and throws baseballs past one of the "your speed is" neon signs that blinks, right? Because obviously that didn't happen, because how would Jimmy know that when he went by, he was throwing 98 miles an hour? It was all made up by Mike Rich. But it was really brilliant because it put the audience in a position, a one-up position. We knew how fast he was throwing and he didn't. And it just gave great joy for the next 15 to 20 minutes to watch that unfold.
And I think that one of the things I'm most impressed with watching it again in anticipation of having this chat with you is transitions, which between scenes, in terms of visually and in terms of story. How much attention do you pay to those, and how difficult is it when you discover that a scene that you had a great transition from A to B is now going to go from A to C because you've decided to delete B? How much attention do you pay to that as a writer as well as a director?
I pay a lot of attention as a writer and director. I mean, I need to know for myself, image to image, where we're going from one scene to the next. And when at all possible, making 1 + 1 = 3. Sometimes the cut itself enlightens the next image in a way. I mean, sometimes it's with a joke. You're cutting to something, you go, oh, but a lot of times it's just kind of dramatically understanding the power of the visual frame and going frame to frame and knowing that's what you want to do. Now, having said that, when you direct a movie, at least a third of those will go out the window because, a scene gets cut and you go, well, the transitions were there. So how do we find new transitions? And you work with it. But I think about that a lot as a writer and director.
I think it elevates this movie beyond what might have been a kind of movie of the week, inspiring story about an old guy who finds his mojo. Some of those, like when he's the boy in his room, and it's a great match for Dennis Quaid, the kid that you got, playing him as a boy pitcher, throwing the ball up to the ceiling and then cutting to him out in the rain practicing, that we see how much love he has for this sport. Was that one that you found or you wrote, you knew going in?
Well, I mean, I knew that I wanted, because Mike had written him lying in bed and holding a ball, I believe. Maybe he was tossing it, maybe whatever. And I said, I want to shoot it from above with the ball coming toward us, so that when we cut, the ball can come toward us in the fence, in the rain. And it'll just, when you overcrank it, it just explodes with water, which is really cool. But yeah, it was all written. It was just, I remember John Schwartzman, our really fantastic cinematographer I've worked with 5, 6 times. But that was the first time we worked together. He said, what's going to happen? He goes, the kid's great, but we spend a lot of time with the kid. You're going to end up cutting somehow straight to Dennis and start the movie there. And I said, I said, maybe you're right, but we're going to shoot all these scenes and make them great. And every one of the scenes with the boy is in the movie. And at the end of it, John Schwartzman said to Dennis, when Dennis showed up for his first day of work and we were finished with the young Dennis, John Schwartzman said, Dennis, you should get your checkbook out and write him a $25,000 check because he set you up so nicely. And it was true. It was true.
Well, next we're going to talk about the Blind Side. I guess the Alamo was in between. Am I remembering correctly?
Yes.
And I also have to, I forgot at the beginning of this to thank both Greg Mitchell at the WGA, who spent an inordinate amount of time with me making sure these clips would work. So now fingers crossed that they do. And also to an editor friend of mine who I've worked with on film I've directed, who helped me cut that, Paul Petchik, who did, I think, a fantastic job of helping me get these clips in order to show them. So now we're going to look at the 2009 Blind Side, which was nominated for an Academy Award as Best Picture, in which Sandra Bullock won an Academy Award for Best Actress. All right, we're back. Hopefully that one played well for everyone too. So much of the vicissitudes of Zoom and people's own setups. But this is a movie that you wrote. It's based on a book by Michael Lewis, which The Blind Side, Evolution of the Game, which is very much kind of like his book. He wrote Moneyball too, didn't he?
Yeah.
Very much kind of a business and analytical view of the sport. You obviously made this very much a family drama and a human drama. How did you come on board it?
I had decided after doing The Rookie, even though I love sports movies, probably not to do another one because Hollywood is quick to put you in a rut, say this is what you do, and categorize you that way. So I got a call from Gil Netter, the producer, had set up the movie at Fox and wanted to send the book out to gauge my interest in writing and adapting and directing it. And I love Michael Lewis as a writer. And so I knew I was going to read the book anyway. And I thought, well, sure, send me a first edition. That's great. I'll take it. And so I got the book and started reading, and about halfway through, I thought, I've got a take on this. I don't think they're going to like it, but I have a take. And so fine, I'll go in and talk to them, because it was an unconventional mother-son story. And half the book, or maybe a little bit more than half the book, was the Chewie family and Michael Orr. And then, the rest of it was the evolution of this position in football.
Left tackle.
Yeah, left tackle. And so it was, how do you combine the two? And so I gave a nod to that by explaining it right up front, but having Leanne Tui's voiceover explain it. I thought that took the stink off of, somebody at a chalkboard or something, explaining this or whatever. And so, yeah, anyway, so they liked what I had to say. And then it was a long process before the movie got made, and we got it out of Fox in turnaround. And Alcon, who Mark Johnson and Jay Russell had produced a movie for them that Jay directed called My Dog Skip, and it was, I think, their first movie. So they had a soft spot for me, and I'd done well by them once, and so they decided they wanted to take it on, and they had an output deal with Warner Brothers. So it went to Fox, from Fox to Warner Brothers.
And originally, at one point, Julia Roberts, I think, was going to play the Sandra Bullock role, though I guess it's impossible to imagine anyone playing it other than her at this point. But she almost didn't want to do it, I understand, because of the Christian element, the strong Christian element of Leanne Tui. Is that right? Until she met with her.
Well, first was, with Julia, she was interested in the script, and we met a three times and had really good discussions, and she really was into it. But then there was some hesitancy there. And then at some point she said, you know what, I've got to go off and make this movie in New York. I've got little kids. I'm not looking to do back-to-back movies. You should do this movie now, and do it without me. And she said, because I'm a little afraid that it's kind of akin to Aaron Brockovich a little bit too much. And so, she had really good excuses for not doing it. One, the Aaron Brockovich, and two, I want to spend more time with my kids. So, hats off to Julia. Then I was a big Sandy fan, but there were a lot of people that thought that she only worked in romantic comedies. And I had seen her do some dramatic stuff and knew that she was more than capable. I also knew that we needed somebody who could play the comedy, or the movie was going to fall flat and be just too kitchen sink drama. So I started meeting with Sandy, and we met several times and talked about it. And she never could quite pull the trigger. She really loved the script, but she said, this woman confounds me, because on the one hand, she's this Christian, Southern Christian woman, but you have her drinking wine and cursing and all this. And, you know, I don't know what to make of this. And I go, well, you know what? You've fallen prey to Hollywood stereotypes.
Exactly. She should go to the South.
Yeah, I mean, because you're going to see a mixture of all kinds of people. And, you know, it's no different than someone, you know, casting a New York taxi driver. They're going to do that. And you're going to go, yeah, I've seen that a million times. And is it partially true? Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. Right. So I just think it's lazy. I think it's kind of lazy writing and casting to do that. And so I said, because that's Leanne. I said, I spent a lot of time with her. And I said, there's no one more fun to drink with than Leanne Toohey. And don't get on her bad side, because she will curse like a stevedore. So I said, you know, that's Leanne, and I love her. I said, but, you know, you've got to do what you've got to do. And I asked Sandy, I said, let's go down and spend a day with Leanne. And at the end of that day, you can walk away and we'll both be fine. I'll be fine with that. That's great, because you'll have met her then. And so we went down and had an amazing, crazy day with Leanne where, you know, gun in the car, double parking, driving to Oxford, pulling kids out of class at high school, typical, just Leanne calls that Tuesday, you know, just getting stuff done. She gets more done in a day than anybody I've ever met. So at the end of the day, we say our goodbyes to Leanne, and Sandy said, I said, well, and Sandy said, she terrifies me. And she said, you know, when I was younger in my career, I would have run from this. But now I think I have to lean into the stuff that terrifies me, because that's the good stuff. And so then at that point, she said yes, and she glommed onto Leanne in a huge way.
Now, did her coming on board, did you do some rewriting specifically for her in light of her experience of Leanne? Did Leanne have any input on the script?
Leanne, no. I mean, Leanne, when I wrote the script, and I was very happy with it. And then I was talking with Michael Lewis a lot. Michael really liked the script. So we had a script everybody was happy with. So now we're going to send it to the Toohey family. And you're always expecting, you can't have Leanne say this, or Sean can't do this, or this makes us look bad. And Sean told me, I got the word back, said, yeah.
Leanne's husband.
Yes, played by Tim McGraw. And so I got I heard back that Sean Toohey had said, seems good. And they had never read a script before. So, they read a script and they go, seems good. Okay, fine. And so I asked Leanne, I go, how involved do you want to be with this process? And she goes, John Lee, I have way too much going on to spend any time on your little movie. And I said, okay, fair enough. And so she didn't come to visit until the last 2 weeks. Although Sandy did make her say every single line of dialogue so that she could sound just like her. And I'll be damned, she does.
So this movie has been criticized by some, I think probably more and more recently than probably at the time, though I think somewhat at the time too, as being a white savior movie where a white family, a white woman in particular, comes in and saves this kid, Michael Orr, from an impoverished childhood and from basically living on the street, gives him a home, makes him a member of the family, and helps him achieve a career as a professional football player. Were you aware of the pitfalls? I mean, unfortunately for you, it's all true in a way. I mean, this is what happened, and Michael Orr has spoken very eloquently about it, though I guess at one point he was a little unsure of how he felt about the movie. But since then, he's spoken very proudly of it and of the his relationship with the Chewie family. How much thought did you give to that at the time?
I mean, I gave some thought to it. Obviously, every year that passes, you have a different lens to look at any story. I think it would be very difficult to make that movie today for the exact reasons, and probably for those are good reasons, probably. But I knew that there were going to be some people who were going to say that, and so I talked to Michael Lewis about it, because Michael said that he had gotten letters after the book came out saying, "How dare you tell this story?" He said mean letters. He was an avalanche of mean letters saying, "How dare you expose this kind of story?" And Michael said, "Well, it's a true story and whatever." And he said, "But I got down about it because I thought, man, I'm catching hell for this." And then he said, "I thought about Leanne and all the hell she caught, because she caught a lot of hell in Memphis for people saying, you're doing this as an act. You're not sincere in your motives." And so I thought, well, if Leanne can take actual attacks, then I can probably suffer through, some bad reviews or whatever. But I also thought, one, this is, for the most part true. And two, my take on it was never that they saved Michael. My take on it was Michael saved them. Their family was doing fine, but they became a family through Michael. And also, just from a charitable standpoint, there was a lot made of the fact that, oh, it's a Christian family. And it's like, the story would have been just as good if they were atheist. This is about a charitable thing. And, as Leanne always points out, there are so many people out there that just need a chance. There's somebody who has a cure for cancer that's out there that just needs a hand. They don't need you to do much more. Sometimes it's, a place to live. Sometimes it's food and clothing. They're going to go off and they're going to do what they're going to do. You're not the savior, So anyway, it's a really good discussion to have. And I think it'd be tough to make the movie today for those reasons. And I understand those reasons.
And I think you found, as someone who's not a believer, I think you found a really great way of showing who she was, but not making that integral to what their motivation was. Because there were so many other people in the movie who opposed what she was doing and didn't get it, and tried to convince her not to bring this big, scary looking kid into her family.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess there was also a little bit, you dealt with it in the movie, about the recruiting of Michael to Ole Miss, where Leanne and her husband had both gone, Sean had both gone. And I guess Sean roomed with Michael Lewis there, evidently, or
no, they grew up
at some other point.
They grew up together and went to Isidore Newman High School in New Orleans together.
I see.
How the blind side came about was Michael Lewis was doing a little book called Coach, which was about a really, really tough high school baseball coach that he had that he felt really made a huge difference in his life, and about how kids today can't take that kind of discipline from somebody, that they run and hide or you're mean and all that. And he said, I learned more from this man about living life than I did anybody else. And so there was a big movement there to fire this coach. And so he was coming back to talk to all his old teammates to see what they thought about this movement. And he came back and hooked up with Sean Chewie again and went to their house many, many times and came across Michael and learned kind of what Michael's story was, that he was living with them and he and SJ were playing video games and doing everything else. And Michael Lewis came home and told his wife, Tabitha, this story. And Tabitha said, you idiot, that's the book you should be writing. And so he went, oh, maybe, yeah. So anyway, yeah, that's the book he wrote first. Then Coach is wonderful. I think he wrote that either right before or right after.
Well, the movie is really holds up for me watching it again after these years, and her ferocious performance is really a big part of it. We're going to move on now to 2013 and Saving Mr. Banks, which I think will also be interesting to hear the evolution of it from you. Well, that's the movie in a nutshell, isn't it? That Disney has to prove himself to Miss Travers as to his motives. She doesn't want any animation. She doesn't want him to Disneyfy her creation. And at the same time, this story really weaves in her origin story, her relationship with her father growing up in Australia, and the woman who, I guess there's a little bit of dissension as to whether it was her mother's sister or her mother's aunt who was the inspiration for Mary Poppins, but trying to bring it together to understand how she's eventually won over. It began life, I guess, as a documentary about Miss Travers, correct?
In ways, yes. There's a producer, wonderful guy in Australia named Ian Colley, who had done a documentary on Pam Travers and wanted to make a movie about Pamela Travers. And it was going to be a biopic, kind of cradle to grave. And so he hired a writer, an Australian writer who's wonderful. And she wrote the script, and they were having trouble getting traction.
That was Sue Smith.
Yes, wonderful writer. And they were having trouble getting traction with it. And so Ian reached out to BBC and you know, and to see if BBC would be interested in joining in with them and doing it, because she obviously was a component to the story, which is Australia and England. And so Alison Owen, you know, was the person he sent it to, who was a wonderful producer. And she read it and said, I understand why this isn't getting traction, because these kind of biopics are out of favor right now. And she sent it to Kelly Marcel, who was a young writer, who was just beginning her writing career, really. And Kelly read it, and they had a conversation, and they both agreed that the part that fascinated them most was the 2 weeks that Pam Travers spent in Los Angeles with Walt Disney fighting over the rights. And so they decided at that point that they would try to write the script to do that script, even though they had no rights to anything Disney. And they knew that they wouldn't be able to get them. And in fact, Allison got a cease and desist letter from Disney saying, we understand you're writing a script called Saving Mr. Banks. Mr. Banks is our property from Mary Poppins. Stop it. And, you know, and so they just wrote, they said, this will never happen, but we're going to write it. We're going to do it anyway. And so Kelly wrote it, and it made it on the blacklist, and Disney read it and purchased it. And everybody said they're purchasing it to chuck it, to put it on a shelf so it'll never be made, because in it, Walt curses, Walt drinks, Walt smokes, you know, Walt's kind of a human being. We can't have that. But the fact that it was written outside the walls meant that we were able to protect it in a way. And Bob Iger and Sean Bailey were big proponents of the movie. And Kelly's a wonderful writer. And like Mike Rich, I brought her in and set her in an office right next to me. And we went through every single page of it. You know, some of the stuff from the clips, or just anything we could take from, we wanted the movie, we wanted Pamela Travers' childhood, the movie Mary Poppins, and this room to all kind of coalesce in a way, so that time was just a continuous stream. And so, for instance, you know, Pam Travers wears around her neck a signet ring that David Tomlinson in the movie actually wears. Did she give them the idea for that? I don't know. She says things, you know, whatever the infernal thing is, when you're talking about supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, that's a line from David Tomlinson in the script. And so our thing was, when she said it, somebody was writing this down and said, that's a really clever way to say whatever the infernal thing is. So there are something like 50 things that are in the movie that are in our movie. And they just kind of come together. And we had a lot of fun doing it. And Kelly's really talented.
And you also had access to the songwriters, who I guess remembered this incident about Red, which was
Yes.
in his autobiography.
We had Richard Sherman. I mean, his brother was passed away, but Richard Sherman was there, and he is as spry as ever. And so he came, and he was just font of knowledge for both Jason Schwartzman, who was playing him, as well as JB Novak, who was playing BJ Novak, who was playing his brother Robert. And so he was really, really helpful. And he read the script and augmented it in places where Kelly would jump in and say, yes, we can change this, change that. And I remember one day he was there all the time when we shot the scenes in the rehearsal room. And there's one day he and Emma were talking, and he was telling us a great story, but we were ready to start shooting and we were kind of running behind. And Emma said something like, excuse me, darling, I have to go be a bitch to you. And that's kind of how he felt. He said, I'm reliving this all. And Richard's the sweetest man in the world. And he said, I didn't know anything about her childhood. I didn't know anything. I just knew that she was really, really difficult. He goes, I wish I'd known. I would have understood.
And bad though it might be in some situations to make a movie about someone who's still alive and can pick apart your script in any number of ways. You did have the advantage of Walt Disney and Pam Travers being gone, but you had the Disney studio very much alive and financing your movie. I know there was some pushback on cigarette smoking in the movie. Did you feel that you were walking on eggshells at various times in terms of the depiction?
I mean, there was really only a couple of times that Kelly had him with a cigarette in his hand. And one of the times was when Pam comes in, she marches into his office and he stamps it out. We knew that Disney didn't allow smoking in their movies at all, much less being Walt Disney in one of their movies. So it was about that. And so I went right up to it. I mean, we went right up to it. I said, when she comes in, and so I just cut it where we see him with the cigarette coming down and he puts it out. There wasn't a lot of pushback. I mean, once we had that, and there were people saying, oh, they're going to make you take him drinking scotch at 5 o'clock out. They're going to make you take a curse word out. They're going to do this, that, and the other. And when I showed the movie to Bob Iger, I was waiting for that. That I would go to his office and he would say, I thought he would like the movie, but he would say, you got to do me a favor. You got to lose this, this, and this, and this. And he said, I love it. He goes, Walt Disney died of lung cancer like 2 years later. He said, everybody on the Disney lot smoked back then. He goes, and what's wrong with having a scotch at 5 o'clock? I don't get the problem. I think he comes off as human, which makes him more lovable because he's not a god. He's a real human being.
And it was the first fictional depiction of him, I think.
Yeah.
One of the things that I remember as being so moving about the film was the way in which it almost created a kind of mystery out of her childhood in Australia, and in which we kind of understood the cathartic aspect of her writing, of her art. Was that something that consciously attracted you to the project, or was that something that you kind of became aware of, if you did, as you were working on it?
It was funny because the script, Sean Bailey at Disney sent me the script, and I'd had a great working relationship with Disney over the years. And he was interested in me, perhaps directing it. They were meeting with several directors, but he really wanted me to be one of the ones to come in and meet with them. And he had strong feelings about it. And they sent the script, and I was sitting on my desk, and I said, I'm not even a big Mary Poppins fan. I'm not a musical guy. I'm not any of that. So I'm not sure why they're sending it to me. And my agent, Scott Greenberg, smartly at the time said, look, read 20 pages. You won't be wasting your time. I'm not saying you're going to want to do it, but you won't be wasting your time. It's really enjoyable. I said, okay. So it got to a Friday, and I picked it up and read it all the way through. And I said, I'm not sure that I grabbed on to all of it yet, but I said, I want to do this. I really want to do this. Because it's about, I had done a movie about a father and a son at The Rookie. I had done a movie about a mother and a son, The Blind Side. And I said, this is about a father and a daughter, ultimately at its core. And so I was drawn to it and got the job, thankfully. So.
And lovely picture that I enjoyed watching again, and I urge my fellow writers to also look at it. Your scripts, even looking at almost every scene of your movies, I think they encapsulate the themes of the whole movie. Is that something you very consciously try to do in your writing? That each scene, in a way, is a kind of a miniature of the film?
I'm not sure that that's conscious, but I think when you kind of allow yourself to understand thematically or emotionally what you're trying to achieve, that's going to seep into everything you're writing a little bit, you know? So yeah, it should be supportive of what the ultimate tale you're trying to tell is and the emotion you want to, pass along.
Well, next and last of the clips is The Founder, 2017, about Ray Kroc, the man who founded, in air quotes, McDonald's, who happens my mother worked for a number of years as a market research analyst in Chicago. So I got to meet him while he was still alive. An amazing performance by Michael Keaton that you did as a pretty low budget indie film by most standards, a $7 million film. And we'll show a clip from it, and then we'll get to some questions. We're going to run over. John Lee very graciously consented to that. And we will have some questions, and I hope everyone can stay with us. We won't run into the darkness because we won't be able to see John Lee, but we will go maybe 10, 15 minutes over. Hopefully that's okay with everyone. And now a scene from The Founder. All right, and we're back. So what you called this once Death of a Salesman with a happy ending. And in a sense it is. This guy is kind of a failure and a real hustler when we meet him, and he latches on to the McDonald brothers concept at their single location. I guess it was just the single location that they had, and decides to start franchises based on it. What attracted you to it in terms of the character, this very gray character?
One, I would say I don't think it's a happy ending. I think it's a different ending. I think Willy Loman takes over the world, and that's not necessarily a good or bad thing, but that's what happens. I was really drawn to it. I mean, one, I said, look, I've done enough of these, real life characters. I don't want to do another one. But I picked up Rob Siegel's script, which was really great. And I thought it was the first time that I'd read a script where I was actively rooting for someone through the first third in a huge way. Through the middle third, I started seeing them do some things that I thought, I'm not sure I would have done that. And then by the last third, I was actively rooting against them. And I thought that was kind of a high wire act that was going to be tough to pull off. That I thought that Rob had done it beautifully with the script. So I said, that's a reason enough to try to do it. But I mean, I had one person in mind, and that was Michael Keaton. I thought was perfect for it.
And in terms of working with the McDonald family, their descendants, they were kind of waiting for somebody to come along and tell the story. Although I guess McDonald's, the Ray Kroc McDonald's, had bought up the rights to a lot of this story as written by other people.
Yeah, they had, these were the grandsons of, I believe, Mac McDonald, who opened the family lockers to us and passed along lots of information. And they said, we've been waiting for a very long time for someone to tell this story. So it was wonderful because they were really helpful too. It was wonderful to be able to do it.
And I take it you got little or no cooperation from McDonald's in this endeavor.
I kept waiting for, when it was announced that we were doing the movie, everybody was saying, oh, McDonald's is going to sue. And I remember thinking, I've only practiced law for 3 or 4 years, but I remember thinking they're a little smarter than that. It won't be that. They're not going to sue us and try to enjoin us or anything like that. I said, that's exactly what we want, because it makes everybody talk about the movie nonstop, and then it comes out. And I said, they're going to realize that. So when they came out with their one, it was kind of one sentence. They said, but what happened is a lot of journalists started leaking the script to them, hoping to start a fight so they could write a story about it. And so they had the script and had read it, and they essentially came out with a one-line response, which is, I'm going to paraphrase, but yes, we understand there's a movie being made about Ray Kroc and the founding of McDonald's. Mr. Kroc was a fascinating and amazing man. It doesn't surprise us in the least that someone would make a movie about his life. Boom. That's it. And I said, well, they're smart.
Yeah, well, that's that. We know that about McDonald's, don't we?
Yeah.
And the relationship, it's such an interesting relationship he has with Joan, the woman who would become his, I guess, second wife, correct?
Yeah, Linda Cardellini.
How did you find out about that aspect of it and write about it from such an intimate point of view?
Well, Rob did tons of research, and it was written about. It was well known that it was somebody who had a Minneapolis franchise, and he had met the wife, and and down the road they got together. I think he actually had a second wife in between who looked a whole lot like Joan, very, kind of platinum blonde and everything, but that didn't work out. And because he had asked Joan, come with me, and she said, I still have children that haven't left the house yet. I can't leave Raleigh. And so he married somebody else, and that didn't work out, got divorced, and then her children were gone, and that's when she said yes.
And were there aspects of the story that perhaps you weren't able to tell that you might have wished you had been able to, that were maybe perhaps too digressive to the main story? There's
so many great stories, behind the scenes of that story, of the story of Ray Kroc and the McDonald's brothers. So it's always, how do you cut all this great stuff, but you're in service of, a greater goal. There are a zillion stories of Ray Kroc in San Diego. I mean, you could do a whole movie about him owning the Padres, or you could do a whole movie about Joan Kroc. I mean, we wouldn't have NPR in California but for Joan Kroc. I mean, you turn on PBS and see how many shows have Joan Kroc Foundation. Joan gave away all their money. I mean,
not all of it, I hope.
All of it.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
They didn't have any children. I mean, maybe she gave some to her daughters. I don't know. But for the most part, it was, I'm getting rid of all of it. And in fact, what she did was, so give the devil his due. I mean, it's like Joan Kroc did a lot of good stuff with that money. Joan Kroc wanted to give the Padres to the city of San Diego so they would never be moved. And Major League Baseball, because she thought, well, the Packers can do it. Green Bay owns the Packers, so we should do that so that it's never moved. And Major League Baseball wouldn't go for it. She used to, every single day when she was older, she would break open the paper and find a story that broke her heart. And she would then just send a big packet of money, have somebody go over and drop it off without telling them where it came from. She gave, I'm going to make this number up, something like $1 billion to the Red Cross. NPR, like I said, it's kind of amazing. It's like, some people might say it's blood money, but at least it went to good places.
Yeah, Balzac once wrote that behind every great fortune is a crime.
Yeah.
So I guess this movie would be sort of the exemplar of that. Well, anything else you want to share about making The Founder that was unusually challenging in terms of getting the script to where you wanted it? No,
I mean, like everything, I did some I did some last minute work on the script during when we were there because Rob was off busy on something else. He's a director in his own right and was writing other stuff. So there were times I would jump in and look at the next day's work and do a quick pass at it. And Michael and I were very close, and I love Michael. And we had many, many meals together talking about scenes to come. And so it was an all hands on deck approach. We didn't have many days to shoot it. It was a lower budget movie. But it was really, we worked really fast and with smiles on our faces. It was really a lot of fun to make.
All right, well, thank you. I have one last question I'm going to ask you at the end, but now we're gonna go to some of the attendees' questions.
Okay.
Well, we've touched on this, but maybe you have a more general answer to give. It's a good question from Eagle Rocker. I'm taking that's not his real name. When working on a biopic, how do you know how much creative license you can get away with? I'm guessing that isn't quite how you look at it.
I look at how much are you comfortable with? And I think every writer and every director has a different level of comfort. There's, you know, I could name some movies, but I won't, that I think are really, really good movies who created a bad guy when the actual person was a good guy, but they needed a bad guy. I don't think I'd be comfortable going that far, especially when the person's alive. You know, that's, you know, what's going to happen, or their grandkids are going to come up to you at some point and say, why did you say this about granddad? You know, and you want to be able to answer that grandchild and go, it was the heart of the truth. You know, there may be some details about it that aren't absolutely true, but I tried my best to be truthful. And you're always going to have stuff. You know, you're always, I mean, one, none of this is true. Tom Hanks is playing Walt Disney. Tom Hanks was not Walt Disney. So right off the bat, it's all fiction, right? We've got somebody pretending to be someone. Pretend means fiction. So you have to approach it that way. But then you also, I think there's an obligation to real people that, you know, and you have to look at it and go, what's going to happen when they approach me and say, why did you do this? You already need to be able to be prepared to have a good answer.
I think one of the reasons that biopics fell out of fashion was that so many of them in the classic era of movies were sort of cradle to grave telling of stories. I remember this one movie about Mark Twain that literally was a cradle to grave story with him on his deathbed and Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn dancing around him as little characters. Is it important? Is it essential, you think, to narrow the scope of a biopicture to a very finite amount of time, like you did in Saving Mr. Banks?
I think you're given. I think it's if you're doing a cradle to grave one, you don't get as much opportunity because you've only got so much runway, right? You're going to run out of runway unless you know somebody's going to allow you to make a 5-hour movie or something, which nobody lets me make 5-hour movies. So there's a certain runway length, and I think it's far better to pick a specific time period and focus on that, because then you get to really dig in. Whether it's One Night in Miami, or, you know, looking at this in a very specific instance, or 2 weeks in the life of Pam Travers and Walt Disney, you know, in LA, or those kind of things. You get to dig a little deeper when you get to spend more time in a shorter period of time.
Stephen Melching asks a question I also want to know the answer to, which is, how do you organize your research so it's not overwhelming? And as a writer who loves to research, and will keep doing it forever till somebody stops me.
Yeah.
Is that something you have to really fix a time period for it and go enough is enough, or how do you organize your research?
I think it depends on the time component of, is this something where, you know, they're expecting this by a certain time, or, you know, are they looking for this to come out next fall or the spring after or whatever? Not that that's the imperative, but, you know, sometimes that component exists. But if there's none, then I think you have to, at least I try to allow myself the time to pretend that there's no clock. And if I love the story, I'm going to love the research and digging in and reading and putting my feet up on my desk and not answering the phone, and then just kind of sneaking up on it a little bit. Like, I'm going to make a note about that, or I'm going to dog ear this page, but just kind of enjoying it. And then the next step for me would be, I'm going to try to categorize all this in a way and see if there's a shape that's starting to form. Because you're right. I mean, I love, if it's a story I love, I could research for 10 years and be very happy, but I wouldn't have a house. So, there's that.
So it's good to have expenses, I think, at some point in every writer's career.
And yeah, you hate to say it, but deadlines are also kind of important.
Jennifer Ross wanted to follow up another of Stephen's questions, which was on approaching family members to talk about doing a picture based on one of their loved ones, either alive or deceased. Do you have a method? Has any methodology evolved for you over that in terms of meeting people whose stories you're going to be telling?
I think you just try to be as honest as you can. I mean, if there's not a script yet, you go and you talk about what your plans are. Don't ever lie. Be transparent up front about, here are the things that perturb me about, your husband, your father, whatever that interests me. I don't know. I mean, there's no good that can come from, if you're trying to get like an option, for instance, in somebody's life or buy life rights or something, there's no good that can come from lying to them up front, getting the rights, and then them being completely unhappy, because we live in a world where they're going to be heard. People are going to come to them and say, what do you think? And if they say it's a bunch of bullshit, well, it's not good.
Yeah. Josh Greenberg wants to know if you have a kind of a very, whether you have a process for beginning to choose which moments to keep and which to excise, or is it just kind of a gradual instinctive whittling away of all the material that you collect?
I try to, I mean, like I said, I try to do as much research and stuff that interests me about whatever the subject matter is, and just kind of making little check marks or whatever, stuff that I find interesting. May make it in, may not make it in. That, and then see if through all this research kind of a natural shape occurs. And I do, I do like structure. I need structure. I need, whether it's a 3-act or a 5-act screenplay, I feel I need that. It helps me to look at the shape of something and say, this can go here, or this can start later, or this doesn't belong here. So I think it's the research first, and then is this coming? Is there a shape kind of coming up a bit that I see working as a 3-act structure?
And we didn't get to really touch upon The Highwaymen, which is a really terrific, I guess you could call it a biopic in a way, of the lawmen in was it in Texas who killed Bonnie and Clyde? Wonderful performance by Kevin Costner. Can you talk a little bit about your writing process? And I mean the kind of small details that other writers love, like when you find out that Hemingway wrote standing up at on a desk, on a table. Tell us about your day and your process, and if it's evolved at all.
I kind of, it's weird, because I think every time I take on something, it looks a little different. There'll be times when I'm sick and tired of my office. I have a little tiny office in Pasadena where I live. And sometimes I just go, I've been writing there, and I go, I'm sick and tired of it. I have to go somewhere else and write. And, I'll come to the guest house or go sit in a coffee shop and just move around. So it's kind of different every time. I still write the first draft predominantly longhand on legal pads. I mean, that's the lawyer in me. And then I'll go back through and make notes and add and put stars and ketchup stains on it and all that stuff. And then once I put it in the computer, it's kind of acts as a rewrite from the legal pad. And then pretty much from that point on, I work on the computer, except for if I need to add a new scene. I'll usually sketch it out on the legal pad.
Do you input it yourself for that process, or do you have someone input it for you?
No, I do it. I mean, because while you're doing it, you're already correcting what's on the page. You know, you're typing and going, I can do better than that. I can get what I was getting at. But so yeah, I put it all in.
And
it's just me by myself in an office. So
do you get up at a certain time and have a ritual and write a certain number of hours or pages a day?
not really. I wish I were that disciplined. I mean, before I had kids, I was kind of a night writer. I would write at night when the phone wasn't ringing, and then sleep in and eat some lunch and then go back to work or whatever. But then you have kids and you have to change. And so I had to change to a little more 9 to 5-ish, where I'm taking the kid. I want to take the kids to school. I want to pick them up. I want to coach baseball. I want to do all those kind of things. I don't want to miss out on any of that. So it ends up being, working a few hours during the day and then a few hours at night. And now my kids are off at college. So it's a little more every day, slightly different. I wish I were disciplined enough to say, no, I go in at 8 and I leave at 4, and I take 57 and a half minutes for lunch or whatever. I'm not. I mean, because the thing is wonderful about writing for me is I'm trying to get lost. I'm doing whatever I can to try to get lost. I don't want it to be 9 to 5. I don't want it to be a job. I want to think it's 9 to 5 and I look at the clock and it's 9 o'clock at night and it's been 12 hours and you don't know. It's just, you're looking to try to get lost, for me at least, and to make yourself laugh and to make yourself smile and to make yourself cry.
Do you use some of your acting chops that you learned for the writing process? Do you speak out loud the characters as you're writing them?
No, I mean, I have no acting chops. So, but that said, I say things out loud sometimes just so I can hear the characters and the cadence, because I'm a writer that likes to think that you write characters in different ways so they have different cadences and different speech patterns, etc., so that everybody doesn't sound exactly the same. So yeah, I like the musicality of dialogue, so I'll say stuff out loud. Yeah.
And what do you do when you get stuck? Have you ever gotten stuck for a period of time that worried you? Do you have any way you work your way out of it, or different every time?
I think it's different every time, but the one thing I will say is when you get stuck, it's a blessing, because that means there's a problem. And now you're going to try to attack and approach and solve the problem. Because when you're stuck, there's a problem. I mean, and maybe it's writer's block and you need to change the scenery or whatever. But for the most part, when I get stuck and I don't know what to write next, then I've got a real foundational, fundamental problem with the story that I need to go back and address and think about with really hard questions. So I look at it as kind of a blessing.
And do you have a method of trying to get to that, or?
The first thing is always, even when I finish a script, and I'm sure everybody does this too, is take a couple of weeks away from it. Don't go jump back in the next day. I mean, just think about it, and your brain's always working on it. And then sometimes you'll go, I know what this is missing now. I need this one little thing. And sometimes it can be one scene that just unlocks and all. It's like your back and your hip and your shoulder and your neck are all hurting. And then, maybe there's a chiropractor who pushes one bone and all of a sudden it straightens out. It can be kind of chiropractic in that way, that if you come in on one scene that works and is emblematic of the tone or the theme or whatever of everything else, then it just announces itself to the rest of the scenes.
Well, John Lee, thank you so much. I guess I should ask you as a courtesy, since you knew you were going to be doing this, if you have any great insights into this genre to share with us that you haven't already, that we didn't get to, or are you happy to ride off into the sunset?
I would say right now, I'm happy not to do one, but then one's going to land on your desk, hopefully. You know, I want to stay employed. One's going to land on your desk, and then you're going to go, no, I don't want to do any biopics. And then it's a fantastic one like these ones we talked about, written by a talented writer who you just, you know, you go, that seems like a life worth examining. So also I want to say that I'm not Michael Jackson. I had hand surgery. So when you see the black glove come through, it's not me. Anyway.
And the Pope story to finish off on?
Oh, yeah. So I have something. The surgery is for Dupuytren's, I believe is how you pronounce it. And it is a genetic thing that affects mostly Northern European men over the age of 50, even though I have a Black friend who has it, which is, you know, whatever, there are exceptions. But when I started to work on The Little Things, my very first meeting with Jared Leto was at his house, and we shook hands, and he said, "You have Dupuytren's." And I said, "What?" And I had noticed my fingers starting to bend in a little bit, and I thought it's either arthritis, because I've broken my hands playing sports when I was younger and stuff. I thought, well, that's what it is. But he said, no, it's called, the other way to talk about it is they call it Vikings disease because of the Northern European thing. But it's pretty common, believe it or not. And so anyway, when the fingers were down, if you were waving, you would wave like this, you know, if you were doing that, right? Because these fingers were down. And now they're straightened out. I can straighten them out. But back then it was this. And so you would wave like that. And someone said that that's the Pope's wave. And I went, oh my gosh, you're right. That's how the Pope waves. He said, you know why that's how the Pope waves? I said, why? I said, because several popes back, there was one that had Dupuytren's. And that was the only way he could wave. And so other popes said, well, it looks kind of, you know, it looks kind of holy. I don't know. It's kind of like the story about, you know, if you go to Disneyland, this is whether it's true or not, I'm gonna say it's true. When you go to Disneyland and you ask direction, where is Frontierland? The person working there will point with two fingers, right? They always point with two fingers. And they say, because that's what Walt did. Walt pointed with two fingers. And sure enough, you go back and look at all these pictures and he'll be pointing and it'll be two fingers. What they don't tell you is that he always had a cigarette between the two fingers and they erased the cigarette out. So everybody points with two fingers because Walt was pointing with two fingers because he had a cigarette between them.
And maybe that's the essence of the bio picture right there in a nutshell. Sometimes you have to tell the truth, but paint out the cigarette.
True.
Well, thank you, John Lee, so much. I know you're doing a Stephen King project next for Netflix. Is there anything you want to tell us about that, or anything else you're working on before we let you go?
No, I hope it gets made. It was a lot of fun. I'd never done a Stephen King adaptation before, so it's a novella from a book from last year called If It Bleeds, and it's called Mr. Harrigan's Phone. It's very much kind of a creepy thing about technology and the evils of technology, but it's a little tiny movie, and so I adapted it, and it's at Netflix. And we're seemingly moving forward. So I'm hoping to be able to shoot that late this fall.
Well, good luck with it. And thank you so much for doing this. It's been an amazing pleasure and easy to get lost in your stories and your explanation of the craft. Thanks again, John Lee.
Thank you so much, John. I appreciate it. And thanks everybody for checking it out. So I hope it wasn't too boring.